Well, first of all, why do we use a mechitza? Oh, shalom aleichem. You can say for a nigun at the end.
Hopefully we say another one.
Yeah, we always do. It's the only way. Okay, so why do we have a mechitza? That's really the question number one. And then, what's the purpose? What function does it serve? Why is it important in some contexts for men and women to be separate? That's really the first question. And then the second question that I'd like to talk about is, no, it's amazing. You're just a superstar. Sort of, how big does it be? So one question is what the function of it is, what's the purpose, when are we separate, when are we together? And then second of all, assuming there are situations in which we need the mechitza, as we know there are, so we'll talk about what makes a good mechitza, what's an appropriate mechitza, and what would be a defective mechitza. Okay, so the first time that we read, oh wow, just when you thought life couldn't get any better. Shalom Aleichem, how are you doing? One honor to see you. Shoshana, אתה מכיר אותו? I'm so happy for you.
guys singing Chenu?
Yes.
You heard us?
Do you know who's?
I have to go there.
It was Ezra. Ezra's inspiration. Ken Ezra's just a superstar. Okay, so we're going to start with the Gemara, which is the first time that we see an indication that there's a situation in which men and women should be separate. Then we can look at how the Rambam takes that piece of Gemara and use that to understand the purpose of a mechitza. And then once we understand the purpose of a mechitza, we'll then go to more modern poskim that talk about dimensions. How big should the mechitza be? You follow? Okay, so the Gemara says like this. In source number 1, it's a very, very interesting story. This is in the last perek of Masechet Sukkah. The last perek of Masechet Sukkah talks about, the whole of the last perek, talks about the Simchat Beit HaShoeva. Do you know what the Simchat Beit HaShoeva is? So, not the one that happens nowadays. Yeah, not just told us Aaron, but originally that is what we go to today is a Zecher. We're remembering, but it was really a huge celebration that took place in the Beit HaMikdash.
Why is this halacha of Mechitza in Masechet Sukkah?
Oh, excellent question. We're going to come.
I know the answer, but
because it starts at the end of the start of Sukkot, right?
They had like a tribunal,
Yes, whatever that means. That was a word that used.
Stage, which okay. I think
Yeah, there was a big celebration. Playing.
For kids.
There is on Shavuot, on Pesach used a tool. Liot Samech thrice, exactly 3 times. So that's what makes Sukkot Zman Simchatenu, and the sort of the epitome of Simcha of Sukkot was the Simchat Beit HaShoeva, with this incredible dancing, bringing the water from the Shiloach up to the Beit HaMikdash, and then pouring water onto the Mizbeach. So that was a celebration that took place, and they talk about huge lights. Our old city was full of lights. Anyone who didn't, if I want to understand what the word simcha means, I need to be at a simchat beit hashoeva. That's what it was. So in the context of that celebration, the 5th perek of Masechet Sukkah is dedicated entirely to talking about this celebration, the Simchat Beit HaShoeva. So in that discussion, the Mishnah tells us, oh, look at that. Mi shelo ra'a Simchat Beit HaShoeva, lo ra'a simcha miyamav, meaning that's what simcha is. Simcha is Simchat Beit HaShoeva. Everyone understand the definition of simcha? Try out a Simchat Beit HaShoeva. Now look at this. B'motzei Yom Tov Rishon, Shel Chag Yardu LeEzrat Nashim. Everybody would gather in this large area called the Ezrat Nashim. Umetaknin Sham Tikun Gadol. And because so many people would come, they would rearrange things in this area in order to make it appropriate for the celebration. So that's the Mishnah. the Gemara then discusses what was the Tikkun Gadol. So Gemara gives some suggestions. I think it was like they tried and then it worked, it didn't quite work, tried again and again, 3 times in total. My Tikkun Gadol, what is this big thing that they changed? Omer Rabbi El Azar, Ke'ota sheshaninu, chelka hayta barishona v'kifua gezustera, v'itkinu shiyu hanashim yoshvot milemala v'hanashim milemata. So they made this takana. They had the men were downstairs dancing in the courtyard, and the women were observing from above. So you had men and women separated, and that's the first time we see in Mishnah or in Gemara an indication that there's men in one place and women in another place. You follow?
It's the only place in Mishnah or text.
That's a good question. That is a good question. Could be. Don't forget, in parentheses though, that at the time of the Mishnah they didn't have Bate Knesset, meaning the place where they were Avodat Hashem took place at home or in the Beit HaMikdash. The concept of a Bet Knesset started forming during the Second Temple period, but it's not really. There's no Masechet that talks about Bet Knesset. For that, we turn to the Rambam, who talks about how to build a shul. Yeah.
Does it say like in the Beit HaMikdash, like the Ezrat Nashim?
Yes, there was an area that only men went into, and there was an area that men and women went to.
Oh.
But there wasn't any time that there was, men where. Yeah, exactly. Okay, the Gemara then goes on. I think we're going to miss out. The Gemara talks about how they came to that arrangement, meaning they tried to maintain an aura of decorum at this celebration, and they tried at one side having the men inside and the women outside, or the women outside, the men inside, the men on one side, the women on the other side. All these different ways of trying to separate the men and women and maintain the simcha. They tried lots of different things and nothing worked until they came to this idea of having the men downstairs and the women upstairs. And that's really the Gemara describing this dilemma and how they resolved it. Okay, that is the Gemara. Joy, happiness.
What was the reason that they couldn't have simcha?
Excellent question. Excellent question. Why is it that they felt the need to separate the men and the women, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of an obvious question, but
No, it's an excellent question. That's very, very good. So if we have a look at the Rambam, the Gemara it says, it's interesting because the reason given in the Gemara and the reason given in the Rambam are slightly different. If you have a look at the Gemara says that they kept on trying different things and they didn't work until they had the men downstairs and the women upstairs. What was it that failed? As long as they had them in close proximity between men and women, that led to the Gemara's words kalut rosh. Now, kalut rosh is.
We spoke in this class before about it. We had a shiur about kalut rosh. It's talking about.
Yeah, so particularness. Now, which are even good. You want to be happy. You want to enjoy yourself. But the human being, there's certain activities that I lose at losing a little bit of my dignity. No, I mean, you can make jokes are good. They're fun. But there's a certain thing. Kalut Rosh is not a joke. It's like demean. It's like I don't know what it is. I'm not behaving age appropriate. Mm-hmm. I'm just like playing around and being a bit silly, which is not a good thing. And that's Kalut Rosh, and that's what the rabbis were keen to avoid. Koved Rosh. Yeah, exactly.
So Kalut Rosh would be undignified?
Yeah, that's not bad.
It's hard to pin an exact word in
English,
but
it's literally void. In front of God, the women elu im elu, so that mix one with another. Now the Gemara didn't say that. The Gemara said that the reason why we're going to separate is because shayu ba'in lidei Rosh. Okay, and then are they the same thing or are they different things? Matem choshvim.
They're the same, just different way of expressing lashon.
Something or other. I don't know that world at all. Then it's probably an observation that the chevra are there having a chat, and they're like sort of interacting in a particular way, and then a group of their friends come who happen to be girls. The dynamic in that group changes, like something shifts a bit. You follow? Yeah. I don't know if that's kalut. I don't think it's always kalut. Shift, and I wonder if the rumble was there. If that environment, a mix of sometimes, I mean, perhaps a Rambam's Shaloit Avut Zaim. Yeah.
Like after that, maybe he's trying to say that like if they were mixed or like close together, maybe like it would affect their dancing, and like they would be like they would like dance for the woman in some way, and like they wouldn't dance because of happiness. They would dance like to flirt or to like impress the woman or something.
It would be like less l'shem shamayim.
Yeah, it'd be like more dancing to like impress them or like be funny. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, there is something that changed. You're very good.
Yeah, cause
sure.
Yeah, like for me personally, if I dance in front of girls, it'll be different than I'm dancing with my friends and like.
Yeah, sure, Shiva, absolutely. Yeah. No, there is a sense. There is a difference. Yeah. Now, the part of that, but it could be that they're almost synonymous. Kalut Rosh and Shelo Yisaklu. I think there may be something different about them, but we'll come to that later. Now, in the Rishonim and the Achronim, there is a very, very little discussion about the Mechitza. I mean, we don't see big discussion, or at least I didn't. It could be that it exists, but I didn't see it myself. I think a lot of the reason is because for many, many years,
the women stayed at home?
Yeah, the women didn't go to the Bet Knesset was a place that the men would go to, and the women wouldn't always go to the Bet Knesset. There's something relatively well. First of all, for the time of the second Beit HaMikdash, until the time of the second Beit HaMikdash, there was no Bet Knesset. The Siddur that we use was written by the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah during the Second Temple period. So it was only then that things were starting. And I'm not sure if there were men, and I'm not sure if women were involved in the tefillot, but certainly in the last 100, 150, maybe even 200 years, where the Bet Knesset became a place for men and for women, the discussion about what's appropriate for Mechitza became more relevant.
I would have thought that it's because they didn't feel it needed any more clarification. The Gemara says this, Rambam says this, period. Like, what more is there to talk about?
No, so then I suppose about the dimensions. It could be that in some, what's it supposed to look like? Meaning, there wasn't a question about whether, and in halachic, there's no debate in halakha about whether there is a mechitza. The only debate in halakha is concerning the dimensions, and part of that debate about the dimensions, part of that debate is probably about what's the purpose. If there is indeed a difference between kalut rosh and shelo yit'arbu ze'im zeh, there could be a difference between, in how I will see the mechitza. Now we're going to look at, obviously, one of the most important poskim in America, Rav Moshe Feinstein, was one of the principal writers on the topic of the mechitza. He writes twice. in two separate. He writes probably more than two, but I want to contrast two of his tshuvot on the concept of the Mechitza. The first one is early. It's in his Chelek Aleph of Orach Chaim. I'll just tell you a very quick story about Rav Moshe Feinstein. Do you know how Rav Moshe Feinstein became Rav Moshe Feinstein? Like how he became a posek? Because he was the Rosh Yeshiva in what I now discover after my little trip. He was in the Lower East Side of New York, which the truth is there was a big Jewish community there, but it wasn't like the center of Jewish life. You know, that at the time that he was in the Lower East Side, there were many Jews living all around the world. At Jerusalem, you know, here in Israel, there was a thriving Jewish community. What happened was, somebody spoke to him in shul and asked him a question, and liked the answer that he gave. So then the guy said, I spoke to Rav Moshe Feinstein, he gave a very good answer. Then he told his friend, who told his neighbor, who told his neighbor's friend, and he became the posek hador, like, what's the word, like, from not from a position. Yeah, it sort of, it happened by itself. Wow. Like, he wasn't appointed the posek hador, just the Jewish people, there was this, created this trend that Am Yisrael turned to him, and then he became the authority. But it wasn't that he held a position of authority that means that what he says is binding on the community, but it was more that the community took him as their leader, which makes him a very authentic, source of halakha, because it sort of reflects he was somebody that was accepted by the community as this is the way normative halakha should operate. Anyway, so he writes like this: B'inyan ha-mechitza shetzarich lihiyot b'veit hakneset bein anashim lenashim. Concerning the mechitza, that it separates men and women, v'shi'ur govha, and how big should it be? Okay, that's the question. Okay, I'm going to jump. He quotes the Gemara that we looked at, and then he says, the af im hayta mechitza aval kazu she'efshar lavo lidei kalut rosh yesh adayin oto ha'isur midoraita. Meaning, Rav Moshe Feinstein is saying the purpose of the separation is to avoid kalut rosh, and therefore you can't just say boys on this side of the table and girls on that side, men on this side and women on that side. They may be physically in different parts of the room, but like you were saying before, it's not going to solve the problem of kalut rosh, because we can interact freely with one another, and that free interaction will lead to kalut rosh. If we go back to my awful example, I'm embarrassed because I was never in this situation myself, but it's the sense that I get of the guys in Ben Yehuda Street, and then the girls come, and that changes the dynamic. So, it may be true, maybe not true. But let's say, you have to be in a situation, if the girls were to come, that would not change the dynamic. You follow? Yeah. So, any sort of, if I'm standing on this side, they come here, we're gonna become one group. So then that wasn't a mechitza, because I haven't avoided the kalut rosh. You follow? So the mechitza has to be such that it will prevent kalut rosh. Okay, so that's his first point. I'm going to skip. I'm going to go to the next paragraph. Hayotze means that based on his analysis, we're not going to do his analysis. We're going to go straight to Rav Moshe's conclusion. Hayotze means that gam b'vatei knesiot shemitkabetzim sham anashim v'nashim litpalel tov yoter לעשות גזוז צרה, שאנשים יהיו מלמעלה, ואם מאיזה טעם קשה לעשות גזוז צרה, צריכים לעשות מחיצה ממש כזו, שתמנע מלבוא לידי קלות ראש, ולא סגי במה שנחשבה מחיצה לכל דבר, כגון בשערים פתוחים, כמו שראינו שלא הועילה במקדש, והיה אסור מדאורייתא. So he's saying, we see that in the Gemara tells us, and obviously for a good reason, about how there were various attempts that were unsuccessful, various attempts to separate the men and the women that didn't work. I mean, try the men on this side, the women on that side, didn't work. Try the other, like these on the inside, that didn't work. The only thing that worked was men downstairs, women upstairs. And therefore, Rav Moshe Feinstein says the ideal Mechitza is men downstairs, women upstairs. Now, when you have the men downstairs, the women upstairs, I can see that there are women in the room, but I can't communicate. That's really what you want. Because, I mean, I know that we're in a room of men over here, but certainly nowadays, there was a time when women weren't going into a Beit Knesset, but there's a certain sensitivity that we need to be aware of, and that is there has to be a meaningful Beit Knesset experience for the women too. It can't just be, if they're coming, I mean, either they don't come, but if they are going to come, then it has to be a meaningful experience for them. So he says the best way is, it's not a problem for me to see the women in the Beit Knesset. The problem is to communicate with them. So I know that there are women there, but I'm not talking to you. That's fine, according to Rav Moshe Feinstein, because there's no kalut rosh there, because we're not creating we're not, there's not the guys and then the girls joining the group of guys there. There's still, the boys and the girls are two separate groups of people. You follow?
Yeah.
That's the ideal. But it's not always possible. Because sometimes the shul isn't built like that. Nachon? Mm-hmm. So what do you do when the shul, if they're all on the same level, how big does it need to be? Aval mistaber lani yadati tesaki b'mechitza gavoa ad achar haktefaim. He says that, and this is beautiful, he says the mechitza should be above the shoulder. Now, why does he not say all the way to the top? I imagine that what he's saying is, really, when I communicate with you, if all I could see is your head, then we're not really chatting. You know what I mean? Try it for a minute.
I think it's also the thing with mingling together.
Exactly. There's
if
no.
You're like disconnected here, then you don't really.
Yeah, exactly. But what he doesn't say further, because I think Rav Moshe Feinstein is very keen for the women to experience tefillah. Yeah, exactly. They're there davening in shul, but you sort of get the best of all worlds according to this position. There's no mingling. There's no kalut rosh. Why is there no kalut rosh? Because we're going to go back to that many times. You're not becoming a group of people, because there's a head above that, sort of above that barrier, but we're not communicating with one another, and therefore the concern of kalut rosh in the Beit Knesset is therefore avoided. Okay, that is the position of Rav Moshe Feinstein. I just want to see, I'm not sure why the end bit, I don't think he's adding anything. Okay.
So Gezuztara?
Gezuztara is the upstairs, like the women's area upstairs. Like if they're two, there's a downstairs and an upstairs. So we see, according to Rav Moshe Feinstein, Rav Moshe Feinstein's concern is kalut rosh. He's worried about flirting between men and women during davening, and therefore, in order to prevent communication, it's okay to be able for women to see men, and it's okay for a man to see a woman, but they're not communicating with one another. They're communicating entirely with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore that makes an effective davening experience. These are the words of Rav Moshe Feinstein. Comments, thoughts? Oh, there has to be a comment or a thought.
Well, I
can't believe.
I guess I could say that,
yes.
I'm pretty sure.
I'm gonna have a drink.
So I'm pretty sure nowadays most shuls are on the same level, just like a mechitza in the middle.
Right.
So it's it's against what they did, right? Because they put them above.
Yeah, because nowadays I think also Batei Knesset have changed. Yeah, most shuls here in Israel, I
Like
think.
it's like on the same level. Like in the middle, there's like a Mechitza,
Yeah, right.
or like I don't know.
I think if they have the space, if they have a second floor and it's open, then they'll put the Torah Nashim upstairs. But most of these
They're smaller.
shuls are smaller, one
Right.
floor.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Sure.
If you have a small room and then put some dividers.
Mm-hmm.
Not every shul has
Yeah.
space to do the double thing.
Uh-huh. Yeah, the goal is to maintain a sort of level of focus on what we're doing in our tefillah. And because we want to maintain a certain level of focus during our tefillah, and I want to avoid kalut rosh, so that's why Rav Moshe Feinstein felt that this would be a suitable way to allow all to be part of the prayer experience, but also avoid kalut rosh. Okay. I've got a question, but I don't have really an answer to it. And that is, according to Rav Moshe Feinstein, during tefillah, we have separation. I think also in Torah classes, we tend to have separation between men and women. In other contexts, we often don't have separation between men and women. Is that because kalut rosh is okay in those situations?
Like what situations?
I don't know, a Shabbat meal, we have men and women sitting together,
Also, I was once
go for a teal together. The zoo is mixed.
This weekend I was in Hebron, and it's like the most religious men and women I've ever seen intermingling. Like there was no separation.
Right, exactly. Is it? I mean, I'm not sure. Is it that there is a concern, particularly because tefillah is like an emotive experience, and therefore there's a concern that I might lead to kalut rosh, and therefore there's certain contexts in which I want to avoid mixing. Kalut rosh is always bad, and therefore in those situations where there's a possibility of kalut rosh, we're going to make sure we'll be separate. Or do we say no? Kalut rosh has got its place. Just tefillah is not its place, and therefore we need a mechitza at that time. You follow?
Yeah,
Do you have a thought on
Yeah, absolutely.
which one's do you have thoughts on?
I think it's the latter one. I think it's not that it has its place. Sure, it does have its place, but mainly is from the opposite side. You could say that in tefillah, it's definitely not its place. In the Bet Midrash, Bet Knesset, is definitely not the place. But not that we're deliberately saying that it's okay in other contexts, but saying that it's not okay in the context of tefillah. In Williamsburg, in Brooklyn, there are men and women of opposite sides of the street. There's one side, one side of the street, women walk one side of the street. Not on the same sidewalk. They walk on different sides. Right. In restaurants in Williamsburg, there's a men's section and a women's section, so families don't sit together. In the Hasidish ones, anyway. So, I guess in that context, they would say that it's never okay.
I know it's complicated because it's well known that Rav Moshe Feinstein, who we have just read, when he made weddings for his children, there was no mechitza. Everybody sat together.
Dancing, there was
for dancing, obviously.
Same with the wedding I went to in Beit Shemesh, and probably every single wedding there's no mechitza, just for the dancing there is.
Yeah, but his children, when they made their weddings, they were separate.
Yeah, I think it was last month I went to a wedding here, and like it was all separate. Like the eating was separate, the dancing was separate, just talking separate. It was all there's mechitza and everything.
Right, so things have changed. So the question is why things have changed, meaning things have changed perhaps beyond what we just read in Rav Moshe Feinstein was really a lovely progression from the Gemara to the Rambam to Rav Moshe Feinstein. We could follow it and we understand. However, nowadays there does seem to be a separation in a wider context than that which we read about just now. Yes.
It makes me think about like weddings, because obviously when you interact with the other sex, you might find someone you're interested in. So it's like it kind of gets to me. It's like shidduchim. Like, do you just get set up with someone, or do you find someone like you meet at a party or like at an event, and then you're kind of choosing in a sense like who you marry as opposed to someone setting you up with someone?
Oh, that's such a difficult question.
Yes, yeah.
There isn't an answer, of course,
Yeah.
to that question. That is a dilemma that I don't think there is any like community. It's sort of in the communities. There's no one that's not like really, really struggling with that dilemma. If it's all separate and if it's all, sort of the extreme on both sides is unhealthy.
I think that the people that divide the always they think that the shidduch is the ideal way to find a wife.
Right. But it means like perhaps you're not marrying for love, or like you'll develop love, but you're not initially attracted. Maybe you don't choose that person that you're marrying. You're not attracted to them on your own.
Times and they get engaged after a week. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to. So there has been a shift beyond what we saw in Rav Moshe Feinstein. So I'd like to explore that in the last part of our discussion. I'm going to summarize from Rav Ovadia Yosef, and then after that I'm going to go to the Sridei Eish and a second tshuva by Rav Moshe Feinstein, who says something different to what he said earlier. We read something from his volume 1. We're going to then go to volume 3. So Rav Ovadia Yosef wrote a book of Tshuvot called Yabia Omer, and in this book Yabia Omer, he bemoans the fact that in he's only giving this as an example, but he's talking how sometimes there's a certain laxity in halacha. Even though there's a halacha says X, nevertheless the community seem to behave following Y. And one of the areas that he gives his example, Rav Ovadia Yosef's example, is women covering their hair, but particularly women covering their hair in a Bet Knesset. And he writes that even though, obviously according to halacha, it is important that a woman do cover her hair, that's not necessarily the norm that you see in the Bet Knesset. Now, because of that, Rav Ovadia Yosef is concerned when we separate the men and women in the Bet Knesset. He's introducing, which is an idea which will be developed further, a second reason why we might need a Mechitza in the Bet Knesset. Rav Moshe Feinstein, who was talking about Kalut Rosh, was talking about, in our Ben Yehuda example, a group of yeshiva bochrim who meet a group of seminary girls. But the yeshiva bochrim look like yeshiva bochrim, and the seminary girls look like seminary girls. And in that context, the only worry, it's a worry, but the only thing is kalut rosh. That's the issue that we have to address. However, nowadays, unfortunately, not all young Jewish men are bachurei yeshiva, and not all young Jewish women are seminary girls. And as a result of that, there is a second problem, and that is that if people are not dressed in an appropriate manner, then men won't just be kalut rosh when men and women are davening together, but there'll be a distraction too. It could be that the Rambam, when we spoke about the kalut rosh, and the Rambam spoke about the mingling, perhaps when he was talking about the mingling, he was Shaloid Arvu Elohim Elu. Maybe it's this second issue, which is more recent than the issue of the Kalut Rosh, and that is, it can be distracting. Not Kalut Rosh because we're going to talk to each other. Even if I just see, even if we see each other during davening, that can be distracting. Now that distraction has had an impact on the way that we view the Mechitza. As you note here in Machon Meir, for example, we have the men are downstairs, the women are upstairs, following precisely what it says in the Mishnah. But there is also, I think, a curtain. Is that right? Yeah. There's a curtain. That curtain is not about Kalut Rosh, because we're not going to be one group of people davening in the shul, but it's more a concern for distraction. Now, it's very hard because none of us lived in any generation other than our own generation. But the truth, I can say as a kid, feeling very old here, certainly, we never had phones, we never had internet, we didn't really use email until I was a student. Like, these are things that are all relatively new. And I think that creates challenges that are new. And therefore the concern about, not about so much kalut rosh, but concern about distraction in a mixed environment may be greater than it was previously. And we see this reflected in source number 7 of Rav Moshe Feinstein. Here, if you have a look over here, he said, "Hine levad inyan hamechitza shezeu davar hamechuyav afilu nashim tznuah biyoter yesh inyan mechitza." So he said, of course, we need a mechitza, even if it's, Moshe Rabbeinu and Tzipora, they will need a mechitza, because it's not an appropriate, two holy people, they would still sit separately because of the concern of kalut rosh. However, as we discussed earlier, there is a second new concern, and that yesh inyan mechitza b'shvil isur histaklut, mamash b'mekomot shetzarich shiyu mechusot, shehen bedin erva bizmanenu. שבעוונותינו הרבים הולכות כמה נשים בפריצות, אף שיש להקל בשביל אלו שבאו לבית הכנסת פרועי ראש, כתב בעל אורך השולחן. It says, it's wonderful that everyone's coming to shul, and even, having my hair a woman having her hair covered is, as Rav Ovadia Yosef wrote, an important halacha, but the Aruch HaShulchan, quoted by Rav Moshe Feinstein, says, is not essential. Meaning, if that's going to prevent a woman from coming to shul, she should come to shul. That shouldn't be the reason why she doesn't come to shul. But this is now a second aspect of what makes it valuable to separate men and women. It's not just the kalut rosh, but we're also worried about, in both directions, we're worried about distraction. What's interesting about this is, I don't know the dates, but I know that the first Shuvah was written in volume 1. Now, it was around the 1950s, I'm guessing. I don't know when the volume 3 was written. Maybe that's the 60s or 70s. But he's mentioning things he had not mentioned before. And I think part of what's made the Mechitza a more significant, piece of equipment is that nowadays, it's not just the kalut rosh that we're concerned about, but we're also concerned about the histaklut. We're worried about not everybody is dressed appropriately all of the time, and therefore, in order not to make distinctions, it'd be very, very embarrassing if the shul, the curtains are open, because everyone, it's absolutely fine. Then one person comes in and goes, quick, let's close all the curtains. So that's sort of become the norm now. Because of this concern for histaklut. Okay, that's Rav Moshe Feinstein. Is that clear? So we've looked at 2 reasons for the mechitza. One reason is because of kalut rosh, and the second one is distraction. And the second one, which is distraction, is really a new idea. It's not something that we saw in the Gemara. It's not something that we saw mentioned in the in the discussion of the Simchat Beit HaShoeva. That's something that's much more recent, that we're worried that in a mixed company there may be a distraction. And I imagine the reason why many weddings nowadays are separate is also because of this concern of distraction, rather than the area of kalut rosh.
So if it's good distraction, well then, why not on a bus? Is there not separate? Or why not like anywhere?
Have you
Sometimes
ever
on a
walked
bus?
through Meir Shearim?
Yeah, but
They advertise women at the back, men at the front.
yeah, but
The Lakewood bus that goes from Brooklyn to Lakewood, there's a mechitza going split down the middle. Men sit on one side, women sit on the
For
other.
real, in New
There's a
York,
curtain.
oh really?
Yeah, curtain across the whole bus.
not even in Israel.
Oh.
That's
Okay,
radical.
I want to conclude our discussion with a story, and then It's in source number 6. He says it explicitly. Source number 6 is a Sridei Eish. That is Rav Yaakov Weinberg, who lived in Switzerland through the Second World War and then after the Second World War too. And he contrasts two big European Jewish communities: the community of Ashkenaz, that is France and Germany, and the community in Poland, the Hasidim and the Yekim. Yeah, exactly. And they had different norms about how the Mechitza should be. And he was saying that the community of the German Jews should, if I'm a Jew from Poland and I'm davening in Germany, so I don't need to change the Mechitza because this is the way the Mechitza is done in Germany. If I move from Germany to Poland, I keep with this is the way the Mechitza is done in Poland, I stick to that. You follow? Mm-hmm. I want to share with you a story that's very, very important in terms of public norms and when things should be separate, when they shouldn't be separate. A very, very important rule of thumb. Having discussed everything and having looked at the different purposes of a mechitza, whether it's kalut rosh or histaklut, whatever it might be, like what should I do? Can I get on a bus tomorrow? You follow? So to understand what the norm should be, this is a beautiful story. It's a story. From when Hannah and I got married, Baruch Hashem. I'll take Mazel Tovs. Thank you. It was a while ago. We got married in a city. Absolutely. We got married in a city called Liverpool. Because Hannah's from Liverpool.
You know the Goldmans?
No, are they from Liverpool?
Yeah, they live in Liverpool.
I'm sure she knows them.
The Nathan Goldman, he's a Chazan.
Ah, okay.
In Stuttgart. Yeah.
What a small world. Excellent. Yeah, it's a very small community. They all know each other.
I think his grandfather was also a Chazan in Liverpool.
Is it Yofi?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sure they know it. So I'm from London and she Liverpool. And at our wedding, we wanted to have a mechitza for the dancing. So I called my rabbi in London to ask him how we should set up the mechitza for the dancing for our wedding in Liverpool. And he said something very, very clever based on the Sridei Eish. Do you know what he said? He said, if you want to know how to do the mechitza for the dancing in Liverpool, you have to speak to the rabbi in Liverpool. You follow? Meaning, there's no such thing as of the rabbi in one city telling you this is the way that the mechitza needs to be in another city. I think that's Yeah, it's also like communal norms. Right. So much of this is relative. What's kalut rosh? When is there a problem with histaklut? When is there not a problem of histaklut? You have to conform with whatever makes sense in that community. You follow? So in Liverpool, if that's the way that they have a mechitza for dancing, so you can't come from London and base, you have to be sensitive to the community and to what's appropriate in that community. The rabbi of Liverpool decides what the mechitza looks like in Liverpool, and the rabbi in London decides what the mechitza looks like in London. Just like the Sridei Eish. So we looked at the idea of a mechitza up to your shoulder, above your shoulder. When is there a problem of histaklut? When is there not a problem of histaklut? But really, it's not. We're not the deciders of that question. That what we do is we conform with whatever the local, Orthodox shul does. So that's the way they do the mechitza in their community, based on they're under what works for them. As we see even from the Gemara itself, we see that the rabbis in the Talmud tried various things until it worked well for them in the Beit HaMikdash. It could be in another generation with a different group of people, they would have tried, and something else would have, meaning it's something that they created based on the dynamic within their community. So I think that's important for us as well. We identify as part of a particular community, and as we've chosen to identify as part of a particular community, so then the norms of what would lead to kalut rosh, what would not lead to kalut rosh, when you need a mechitza that you can't see, when you need a mechitza that you can't see, that's all part of the community norms. And once we know the community in which I identify, so then I follow the Mechitza, whatever, if I live in Williamsburg, so then that's how they've decided that the separation should be. If I live in Kiryat Moshe, if I've chosen to identify as somebody who lives in all different types of neighborhoods, I conform with whatever the local religious community decide is the way to do things. So I want to bless us all, Be'ezrat Hashem. The challenge that you mentioned earlier, of on the one hand, we want to avoid kalut rosh, and we also want to avoid distractions, but we also would like, Be'ezrat Hashem, all the young men and all the young women in Am Yisrael to find their soulmates as well, and we should be blessed to have the wisdom to find the balance, that on the one hand maintain our dignity and maintain our kedusha, but also allow for the next generation of Am Yisrael to come into the world. Yishar koach to all of you. Tizkul mitzvot.